Hello everyone and welcome to the first video of the English Tropical Weather channel. After a little more than 4 months of off-season calm, we meet today to talk about the first seasonal forecast for the coming season, and without spoiling the end of this video, I'd like to inform you that it's not good at all. And speaking of these forecasts, if you've been following me for any length of time, you'll know that I don't generally put much faith in these early April forecasts because cyclonic activity factors can vary rapidly, especially SSTs. But also because we still have a hard time understanding all the atmospheric interactions that come into play to make a season very active or not. I need only cite 2 recent examples to illustrate the point. The 2017 season was forecast to be not very active in April, and unfortunately we saw how that turned out. And then last season, the same thing, forecast to be not very active with El Niño, and a season that ended up being very active and started very early, almost at the beginning of June. All this to say that these forecasts must be taken with great caution and should only indicate a trend at this stage. The season starts in 2 months' time, and the peak will be in just over 4 months' time. So there's plenty of time for conditions to evolve, one way or the other. If you've been following me for any length of time, you'll know by now that cyclone forecasting in this time frame is essentially based on 2 things. The first is water surface temperature in the tropical Atlantic, and the second is the state of the ENSO oscillation, i.e. whether we're in an El Niño, La Niña, or neutral episode. And this, unfortunately, is where the problem for this season begins. Everything is falling into place for the 2024 hurricane season to be extremely active. If you look at the water temperature anomalies in the tropical Atlantic, you can see that they are positive and high. We're at the same point as last year at the same time, i.e. it's extremely hot, and that's not good news. As you can see on the map, some areas near the Caribbean arc are already over 28 degrees, whereas temperatures should be around 27 degrees at this time in the major development zone. On a positive note, however, if we look at the last 7 days, we can see that there are areas where temperatures have risen more slowly than the climate average over the last 30 years. There's nothing to celebrate yet, but in this situation, you have to take all the good news that comes your way. If we look at the temperature series in the North Atlantic, we can see that for the whole of last year, we were above record surface water temperatures, the orange line. And since the beginning of the year, we've been on the same trend, although there's been a slight dip in recent weeks. Historically, since the beginning of weather records, this is the first time that North Atlantic water has broken all records on a daily basis over 12 consecutive months. This is quite worrying, and we'll have to wait for more precise scientific studies to find out whether this is a cyclical phenomenon or a more serious trend, or even possibly the crossing of a climatic tipping point. It's too early to know, but the impact on the future of hurricane seasons could be real, if not purely cyclical. As we saw last year, high surface temperatures in the tropical Atlantic led to a much more active season than expected, despite the presence of an El Niño episode. As for the ENSO oscillation and its current state, this graph shows that we're still in an El Niño episode, although the trend is downwards. It does, however, seem to be dropping a little less rapidly than forecast at the start of the year. There has also been a very significant and rapid oscillation in SST over the past month. It's unusual to see this type of oscillation in SSTs in the Niño 3.4 zone, and I can't explain the cause at this stage. This downward trend in surface temperatures in the tropical Pacific is nevertheless logical and consistent with ENSO forecasts. But, as you know, these forecasts must be treated with great caution. Beyond 4 months, they quickly lose their relevance, and we know that in the past, there have often been major discrepancies between forecasts and reality. The cruelest example was 2017, with the forecast of an El Niño episode that turned into a La Niña, and the consequences we know about with hurricanes Irma, Maria Jose, and all the others. These major elements of forecasting ENSO and SST are not the only ones. There are other oscillations, such as the MJO and NOW, which can also influence cyclonic activity in the Atlantic. Taken together, these factors point to a particularly active season. The combination of high SSTs in the major development zone and a La Niña episode that will limit shear winds is unfortunately well known and usually leads to significant cyclonic activity. The first forecast we're going to look at is that of the Euro or ECMWF 6-month model. It's seen as particularly aggressive by specialists, and that's always rather worrying. The number of systems envisaged seems rather low at first glance, but this is due to the fact that this forecast is based on a 6-month period and therefore stops at the end of September, i.e., 2 months before the official end of the season. By extrapolating the end of the season on the same basis, we're quite close to the forecasts of the other two organizations we'll be looking at, and above all, well above the statistical averages of the last 40 years. The second forecast is from AccuWeather, an organization with a very serious reputation. And here the superlatives are really strong with the term explosive season. I confess I still have a bit of trouble with these terms, which seem to me to have more to do with sensationalism and buzz than with science. But let's move on. For this organization, the season is also forecast to be extremely active, with figures that I don't recall having seen before in this type of exercise, and which are close to the worst hurricane seasons of this century. We're talking about 20 to 25 named storms, the record being 26, 8 to 12 hurricanes including 4 to 7 major ones, and an accumulated ACE energy of 175 to 225, which brings us close to the record year of 2017 in this respect. The table also points to a possible increase in the number of hurricanes impacting the USA. These figures are literally mind-boggling and in any case, worrying. The third and final forecast I'm going to talk about is from the Tropical Weather Department at the University of Colorado. This is a research department at the cutting edge of science when it comes to forecasting hurricane activity several months ahead. With a few exceptions, including last year, they are often on a forecast trend that happens to be confirmed by the facts. And as with the other two, the CSU forecast is truly incredible, with figures that have never been seen before. 23 named storms is very close to the record. 115 days of named storms is huge, as are 11 hurricanes, including 5 major ones, and 45 days of hurricanes, including 13 major ones. And in terms of accumulated cyclonic energy, AC, that's another very high figure. But if we go into the details of this forecast, we come across some equally worrying elements in terms of the regions impacted. We see that 62% of these cyclones are forecast to hit the U.S. coast, compared with 43% on average, and that 66% of these cyclones are forecast to impact the Caribbean, compared with 47% on average. These figures indicate that the forecast trajectories are further west than usual. As a result, the percentage of cyclones impacting the coast is expected to be higher than average. And all this with a much higher than average number of cyclones. The reason for these average trajectory forecasts is a pattern of atmospheric pressure in the Atlantic that would lead cyclones to move less up the North Atlantic and more westwards, and thus towards populated areas. These forecasts also take into account the significant risk of cyclonic genesis in the Caribbean Sea. As I said in my introduction, these forecasts must be treated with great caution, given the still distant future. Nevertheless, the consensus they represent remains worrying, and the risk of a very active Atlantic hurricane season in 2024 is now real. We now have to wait and see how these forecasts evolve, starting next month for the ECMWF model and early June for the CSU. In the meantime, enjoy the next 2 months of rest before the official start of the 2024 Atlantic hurricane season. Thanks for watching.